Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics, our regular review of all the week's political news and events live on KMTV. Now, it was hailed as a make or break budget for Chancellor Philip Hammond, and it seemed that he did just about enough to keep on side with Conservative MPs. But do his sums add up? And does the eye-catching plan to abolish stamp duty for first-time buyers stand up to scrutiny? We'll also be discussing the latest development in plans to reorganise hospitals in East Kent and what it means for patients. With me to chat about these issues is Allen Simpson, who stood for Labour in Maidstone at the last election and is also an economist, so he should be able to help us make sense of the budget, and we'll be testing him on the price of a pint of milk later on in the show. First, Josie Hannett recaps the main headlines from the Chancellor's statement.
80% of first-time buyers will not have to pay any stamp duty at all, thanks to the Chancellor's big announcement in his budget speech. Stamp duty will be abolished for first-time buyers purchasing a house worth up to £300,000 from today. The Chancellor also pledged to build 300,000 new homes every year by 2025. He's put forward £44 billion of funding for the housing market over the next 5 years, and there'll also be 5 new garden towns around the UK. For transport, there's a £400 million infrastructure fund being created to boost the number of charging points for electric vehicle cars, and company car tax will increase by 1% to pay for cleaner air measures. A key announcement on benefits was about universal credit. £1.5 billion has been set aside to abolish the 7-day delay in payments to help more people struggling with household debts. The minimum wage, now known as the National Living Wage, has gone up to £7.83 an hour from April next year, and the personal income tax allowance has been raised to £11,850 from April. In business, the VAT threshold will stay at £85,000 for the next 2 years. Business rates reviews will also be conducted every 3 years rather than every 5. And duty on wines, beers and spirits have been frozen. The planned fuel duty rises have been cancelled, much to the delight of drivers.
Well, Alan, Philip Hammond avoided the disaster from his last budget and seems to have created a package which has satisfied his own party. What's your take on his statement?
I think he did quite well. Budgets aren't easy. You start from the premise that if you can get through the next 2 days without being on the front page of the paper for the wrong reasons, it's gone quite well. He didn't manage that last year. He probably has this year. And although I have a lot of sympathy for him on this is something he was left with. The economy is in a fairly parlous state. And we'll come on to stamp duty in a bit, I'm sure. But the underlying economics that he's dealing with are in a really, really difficult position.
I mean, the forecasts for downgrading the kind of economic predictions do seem quite dramatic. I mean, what do they tell us about the economy?
Well, it tells us two things. It tells us that they've been measuring it incorrectly for the last few years, and there's been an assumption that productivity is going to take off any day now. They're now accepting that it won't. But it also tells us that Brexit's going to have a very, very negative effect. Next year we're expected to grow at 1.3%. That takes into account about a 0.5% loss as a result of Brexit, and that's going to be the situation for a long time now. Well,
let's hear from Craig Mackinlay, South Thanet MP, who is an ardent Brexiteer, and he's got a slightly different view, so let's just hear what he has to say.
What it will do is mean that people don't have to shell out that large amount of stamp duty when they first buy. That's money they need for soft furnishings, doing the kitchen up, doing the drive up.
Going to IKEA.
Exactly. So, yeah, it has been said that it may increase house prices by 0.3%, but the good thing about any of this, it's not going to the government, it'll be staying with people. And I think I've never been a fan of stamp duty. I think it should go further. There was something I proposed to the Chancellor, was a downsizing relief for the elderly, because there are far too many elderly people in bigger houses than they need as they get older, often if they're widowed. And the cost of stamp duty on moving is enough to make many of them think, I'm just not going to pay it out. So they stay in bigger houses than they need.
And of course the budget was underlined the importance of what's going to happen in terms of the UK's departure from the EU, the great Brexit debate. £3 billion the Chancellor gave to preparations for Brexit. I thought Brexit was supposed to be saving us money, not costing us.
Well, it certainly will in the long term, but you know, we need to put together new customs arrangements, new border controls, because there will be a change to to borders and obviously custom arrangements, very relevant in Kent, down in Dover. And we're going to need to put together new agencies like the Medicines Agency, air traffic. There are lots of things that we'll need doing because of Brexit, and I think it's very sensible we're putting that money in place now, because who knows, there may be no deal at all, or a WTO deal. I say even WTO is a deal, but depending on the outcomes will mean that we need to be ready on day one.
Well, we're joined by Chris Price, the KM's business editor. Thanks for coming into the studio, Chris. Now, the budget this week seemed to have gone down reasonably well. What are Kent businesses saying about his statement?
Well, I think there's kind of two sides to this from the business point of view. You've got one side, businesses saying, well, actually, this was a budget that was really aimed at young voters and trying to win over them. And then on the other side, you've got and that there wasn't that much in it for business. And then you've got some businesses who say, well, actually, let's look on the bright side. We had the VAT threshold for businesses was extended by another 2 years at £85,000. We also had the revaluations of business rates, something which has been a really, really, really big issue for businesses. That's now going to be done every 3 years rather than 5 years. And also, business rates are going to be revalued using the CPI, Consumer Prices Index, rather than the RPI, the Retail Price Index, which is higher. So businesses are potentially going to be paying less than business rates. So actually, a lot of businesses, although they said, well, there were a lot of attempts to try and perhaps win a certain type of voter, actually it was good for them.
Alan, with your political hat on, you know, stamp duty quite attractive. Is there a sense in which you think he's appealing to kind of younger voters?
If he is, he's not doing it very well. I mean, to go back to the economics of stamp duty, they are very clear. If you abolish it, what happens is the value of houses goes up. So what he's done is raise the price of a starter home. And I don't think that's necessarily what he intended to do, but it is what he's done.
OK, well, we'll move on to another interesting announcement this week with Highways England talking about their plans for a new Thames crossing, which could cost £8 billion, but bring the same amount of investment into the South East economy. They held an event presenting the latest designs for the crossing. Protesters say there'll be increased traffic and environmental damage during the proposed 10-year project. Cameron Tucker has more.
Some big numbers were bandied about at the Lower Thames Crossing update in Rainham. It was announced the £4.4 to £6.2 billion project, which is expected to open to traffic in a decade, will provide £8 billion for the regional economy and 6,000 jobs.
I think it's a fantastic time for both the Lower Thames Crossing team, Highways England, certainly for CLEP, certainly the business communities, and yeah, I think government are really encouraging us to get on with it at a pace.
Realistically, the tunnel could really change the economies of Essex and Kent in terms of travel to work patterns, in terms of the visitor economy as well.
In recent weeks, key changes to the project have included an extra lane being added between the A2 and A13, which will involve widening the A2 to M2. Highways England have said the changes will improve traffic flow, but with the current crossing already handling 6 million journeys above its capacity, some commentators have been left wondering why there weren't 3 lanes in the original plans. There have also been concerns raised about the level of traffic and pollution the project could cause, issues Highways England will be looking to address in the forthcoming public consultation.
Perhaps certain issues will be fixed because they are hard engineering issues that we have to face, but there is a lot of local issues that we can deal with, from embankments to fencing to access points to landscaping. There's so much for people to get involved with, and we need to get their view on it.
Plenty of positive rhetoric and support from business leaders in Rainham today, but fears of more scenes of tailbacks and the impact on the environment this will have mean those behind the project aren't ruling out further changes. Cameron Tucker, KMTV, Rainham.
Well, Chris, the interesting news was they're going to add a lane either side to create a 6-lane motorway. But I mean, the problem is that will be fine for motorists travelling in that particular area. But when they come through Kent, you've got the toothpaste tube problem, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that businesses have often complained about, and actually a reason why many businesses said, that two lanes in either direction would be completely inadequate, because by the time that the Lower Thames Crossing was up and running, it would get over capacity very, very quickly. There is the announcement that they're going to widen the stretch of the A2 from junction 1 of the M2 up to where it's going to connect around Cobham and heading up. The issue is, we need capacity. We need capacity for freight travelling from the ports right the way up to the rest of the country, and the only way to do that really is to make sure that there is enough capacity in the Lower Thames Crossing.
Alan, you've been a resident of Maidstone, so you will have seen it firsthand, the incremental increase in traffic. I mean, there is the wider problem seems to be that the government is looking at the big picture stuff in terms of Thames Crossing, but doing nothing for the rest of the road network.
Well, that's true. We do need to fix, and to take Maidstone as a problem, anybody who's driven through the centre of it knows that traffic there is a huge problem and we need to fix it. But we do need to invest in infrastructure, and we're not going to create more lorries by building this, but what we are going to do is to direct them in a more efficient way, and if it creates jobs, that's not a bad thing. Yes,
but I mean, what's going to happen to the rest of the Kent roads, which are already, seeing increasing congestion?
Well, we need to have the government fix that as a separate project, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do this, but what it does mean is that you then think about the knock-on onto other roads and fix those things as well. And there's a broader point, which is that last year we were growing consumption very quickly. We're not now. We need to fix that with infrastructure.
Okay, well, we're out of time, I'm afraid, on that one. Coming up after the break, we'll be talking about campaigners who've called on the Health Minister, Jeremy Hunt, to build a new hospital in East Kent. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back to Paul on Politics, live on KMTV with our guest Allen Simpson. Now, campaigners called on the Health Minister Jeremy Hunt this week to build a new hospital in East Kent. Members from the campaign group Concern for Health in East Kent travelled from Canterbury to London to show their plans to improve some of the worst hospitals in the UK. The group met with the Secretary of State for Health to give him a letter asking for support. Harry Peet joined them on the trip.
This was the moment where the future of hospitals in East Kent could have been decided. Ken Rogers and other campaigners from Concern for Health in East Kent made their way from Canterbury to Jeremy Hunt's office in London in the early hours of this morning. Their goal was to meet with the Secretary of Health and present him with the issues facing the trust, which is ranked one of the worst in the country.
This isn't modern healthcare. It's pretty second rate.
And the impact on the other two hospitals, QEQM and W. William Harvey, they're bad, they're severe, the impact it's having, because they're trying to deal with all what's been taken away.
It's all money saving. It's all money saving, it's not patient focused. The outcome that people are looking for is a save of money.
In Canterbury, when I've been there recently, in some ways it's like the Marie Celeste, because the services that have been taken away, it's made it underused.
While the protesters stand outside the Department for Health building behind me in London and voice their opinions to the public, inside the building, Ken Rogers from Czech, along with Helen Whaley and Rosie Duffield, are voicing their opinions to Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt, on what they think is the best way forward for hospitals in East Kent.
We've got half an hour discussion around the table. Most members of Czech were able to talk, got their own point of view, and I think it was positive from our point of view.
Czech gave Mr Hunt a letter, which, as well as outlining the issues, also showed the need for a new hospital to be built in Canterbury, an idea which was supported by MPs Rosie Duffield and Helen Whaley.
You heard the concerns about what's going on in hospital right now, the problems in A&E, but also the vision for the long-term future, that we could have a fantastic new centralised hospital in Canterbury, that we've got developers offering to build a substantial part of that hospital.
He can be in absolutely no doubt of our needs in Canterbury and the surrounding area, and we gave him letters and represented what was going on. I told him how desperate my constituents are, and the ultimate decision rests with Jeremy Hunt and his team.
But back in 2002, a new £1 million hospital in Canterbury was ruled out because it was too expensive. So are they confident that one could be built this time?
Reasonably confident. There's so much, sort of public support here, and people are, like I said, desperate, and we've got to keep that message going forward to Jeremy Hunt. He blamed bad leadership, and I couldn't agree more.
The cards now rest with Jeremy Hunt to decide how to rebuild East Kent's hospitals back to their best. Harry Peet for KMTV in Westminster.
Well, just this afternoon, and it may be People Power that got it, we heard from the government that, not from the government, from Kent NHS, that Canterbury is to be considered as an option in the reorganisation of services. We've spoken to campaigner Ken Rogers, who says this is a welcome step in the right direction.
It would absolutely save lives in Kent. I think it's all about patient care. And whenever we've gone through, we know that the most overriding factor is that the people of East Kent get the best possible health service they can. I don't want the people of Thanet to suffer. I will make sure they don't suffer, and I think if this goes forward, it will be an improvement in the healthcare, not a downgrading as they probably would think on first measures.
Well, Harry, reorganisation of hospital services is always a kind of emotional thing, and Canterbury people are very attached to their hospital. But if they do get a new hospital, it means downgrading for the other hospitals. Do you think the campaigners understand that and realise it?
Well, speaking to Ken this afternoon, as we heard there, he's said that, while they are campaigning for this hospital to be built in Canterbury, they're saying that, although it's still, either way, it's still a fair distance to get to, these places on the coast to get to Canterbury. He's saying that this is the ideal location for East Kent because of how central it is in Kent.
But yeah, but it's centrally placed, but the road network around the area strikes some people as being fairly awful. So that's something, that's another issue, isn't it?
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, for those people who live in the coastal towns, in a serious emergency, you're going to need somewhere that's nice and close to get there. And wherever a hospital is, unless it's right next to that town, it is going to be a long way to get there. And Ken hasn't ruled out that there could still be the services in the hospitals that are already there.
Well, we saw an interesting political alliance there. The MP for Canterbury, Rosie Duffield, Labour MP, and Helen Whately, the MP for Faversham and Mid-Kent, talking from the same hymn sheet, as it were. That was interesting.
Yeah, the question was put to them. Interesting to see you two ladies stood next to each other and speaking about this, despite being from opposing parties. But Helen was quickly to say, this isn't about politics. This is, an interest that we both share, and we both want to fight for our constituents.
Alan, it is in a sense a bit naive to say it's not about politics, because this is a top-down driven reorganisation from the government which wants to cut spending on the NHS.
It is politics, and it's politics at its best if people from two parties come together to work on this. But there's a bigger point here, which is that our hospital beds are taken up by people with dementia, Alzheimer's. Those things should be dealt with through social services and in the community. They're not because of cuts and mismanagement. As a result, they are being forced into the healthcare system. And if we want to make savings and deliver services better, that's where we start to look. This is a result of mismanagement elsewhere.
Harry, I mean, do you think there's an appreciation that this is only just one part of the reorganisation, and we need to look at kind of the social care side of things as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, speaking to a lot of the people who were part of the Concern for Health in East Kent, they were saying that lots of people who have these issues and go to hospitals, they may not necessarily need to go to the hospitals in the first place, and if the issues are sorted out beforehand, and they can have treatment at home, or they can go to somewhere, closer to home, and they can get the care they need. They don't need to then put the pressure on the A&E, which obviously a lot of these hospitals, particularly in Canterbury, are saying is an issue.
Do you think, Alan, this is kind of the wrong priority in terms of spending and investing?
It has to be a priority. You can't lose your primary services, but you can save money by investing further down the chain to make sure that elderly people, vulnerable people, are able to get the care in the community and much more locally, as you say. Then they don't need to travel those huge distances to massive hub hospitals.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for your contributions on that one. Now, we've heard this week that campaign group Keep Kent Breastfeeding was in Maidstone gathering a petition to ask Kent County Council to rethink changes to breastfeeding services and cuts in specialist provisions. Poppy Jeffrey went along to find out more.
More than 60 people gathered to present a petition to Kent County Council asking them not to make a money-saving move affecting breastfeeding services. KCC wants to bring in trained midwives and nurses from the health visiting service to support new mothers, rather than specialist breastfeeding support. It would start in March and save them £400,000 each year. Keep Kent Breastfeeding organised a peaceful demo, with many people bringing their children along as they made their way from Maidstone West Station to County Hall to give over the 5,000 strong petition.
They do, I believe, want us to have a good service, a responsive service, but I do think there are slight problems with them understanding some of our points, and so I think we need to keep the dialogue open. We need to really work really hard as a pressure group. We need to work really hard with KCC to make a really good plan for Kent. We want to be world leaders, countrywide leaders. We want our services to be the best in the UK.
If it goes ahead, the move will see 17 specialist clinics and 21 breastfeeding peer support clinics replaced with 36 general clinics and 4 specialist clinics spread across the county.
They're removing open access to lactation consultants and they're making a whole swathe of other changes, so reducing the amount of breastfeeding groups. Mums won't be able to go and get the specialist support that they can currently, and that's what we're really concerned about.
But council leader Paul Carter said he wants to make sure the services are not made worse by the changes.
I'm determined to make sure that the service is improved, not diminished, and I believe we have the opportunity and the capability to do exactly that. I believe strongly, as I say, as harnessing the capacity of the extra 10 million invested in doubling the number of health visitors in the county of Kent.
But it's now a waiting game to see if the protest will affect the council's decision. The current consultation ends on December the 3rd. This is Poppy Jeffrey for KMTV in Maidstone.
Well, Alan, is this just really council cuts taking place here? KCC says it's a better way of organising services, but that's obviously not what young mothers and others think.
It is about cuts, and cuts do tend to bite here. They bite on the most vulnerable often. And this really matters, this breastfeeding issue, for 2 reasons. One is we know that breastfeeding is something which is very difficult and very important to health for new infants. The other thing is actually it matters for mental health for mothers too. One of the biggest triggers for people suffering from postnatal depression is feeling that they're failing their child in the first few days, and not being able to breastfeed, failing to latch can be a trigger for that. And I'm deeply concerned at any cut which bites at such an important stage in people's lives.
And this seems to be taking away services from the areas where young mums and others say they need them.
Yeah, and if that's where people say they need them, that's where the money should be spent. I think it's a very small amount of money to save, and it can have a very, very big impact, not just socially, but also right down at a family level and for individuals. And we should be very nervous before we do that.
OK, well, I'm afraid the clock's against us, as it always is. That's all from us here at Paul on Politics. Thanks to our guest, Allen Simpson, for coming into the studio. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, you can catch up on all the latest political news in Kent by logging on to KentOnline.co.uk or listening to KMFM or following me on Twitter at Paul on Politics. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon.